In this study, I will be exploring American New Wave cinema through the comparison of the 1977 American film Star Wars, directed by George Lucas, with the 1982 science fiction thriller Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott. I believe these two films to be the perfect candidates for this study, as both fall into the definition and correct time period of American New Wave cinema, as well as the sci-fi genre. However, both go about it in drastically polarizing ways. American New Wave cinema is marked by the appearance of a new wave of film directors in the late 1960s all the way through the early 1980s. The majority of these new directors were believed to be fresh out of a variety of film schools, equipping them with the knowledge and ambition that was debatably lacking in that era of old Hollywood. The majority of films from the era before American New Wave cinema had placed most of the authority in the hands of the respected film studios, by way of production and marketing. The shift of power from the hands of the studio to the director is the primary focus of this era. This would inevitably lead to the unprecedented shift in style, composition, and viewing techniques. A heavy focus on one particular vision from one particular mind gave each film in this era a unique feel, tone, and narrative, a debatably much-needed departure from the autopilot second-nature aspects of old Hollywood. George Lucas's 1977 space adventure film Star Wars is perhaps one of the greatest examples of American New Wave cinema, as it was at the time completely unique in its approach of presentation, most heavily due to a precise and driven vision from the director. The film uses alien worlds, characters, religion, and society to perform a unique retelling of a fairly conservative, by-the-book hero's journey, heavily resembling a classical fairy tale. This would place the film more in line with the fantasy genre than science fiction. However, for the purposes of this study, we will categorize it as such. On the other hand, Ridley Scott's classic film Blade Runner manages to fall into the same film movement and genre, while taking a drastically different approach. Scott's direction on Blade Runner takes just as dramatic an approach as Lucas's, using similar techniques such as combining a classical style, this time film noir, with another contrasting element, in this case, a bleak technologically advanced future society. Blade Runner, along with Star Wars, can be categorized as science fiction, though most would consider Blade Runner to be the stronger contestant in that category. The science fiction genre is best categorized with the American New Wave cinema era, as the majority of those types of films were shot between the late 1960s and early 80s. However, most would say the genre was invented in the latter half of the old Hollywood years, the 1950s. The science fiction films of the 1950s certainly had their high points. Examples of such would include 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1954's The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and 1956's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. As such features maintained both commercial and critical success, the latter would begin to wane, as studios would start to pump out feature after feature in rapid succession, creating what many would consider a bland and hollow oversaturation of such material. This proved to be one of the major factors of the creation of American New Wave cinema. Both Star Wars and Blade Runner are interesting cases as they have historical connection to both eras. And though they fall more in line with the more modern of the two, both films feature aspects of Golden Age Hollywood unrelated to their science fiction classification. When examining the characters that populate the worlds of film, specifically protagonists, and to some respect the antagonists, American New Wave cinema was a drastic departure from its Golden Age counterpart. Counting back from the 1950s, most Golden Age Hollywood protagonists were considered as solid characters that would interact with the events of the narrative based on their established character traits. James Dean, Marlon Brando, and Humphrey Bogart are key examples of this. Given their solid nature, it was only natural for the audience to simply observe these types of characters and the situations they were placed in. As expected, American New Wave cinema took this Hollywood norm and turned it on its head. As the young directors of these films were looking to gain back the attention of younger audiences lost in the decades before, a drastic change was needed in the way people viewed film. One of such changes was made to the way characters were designed. The idea was to design the protagonist as a sort of viewing port for the audience, directly the opposite approach of the Golden Age. By making the primary protagonist an open slate, a sort of everyman, not James Dean, but at the same time not personalityless or boring. the audience would subconsciously interject themselves into the character. This would prove to be an outstanding success. Audiences' excitement levels skyrocketed, as suddenly they were the ones on screen, and the story revolved around their foreseeable decisions. An audience member couldn't interject themselves into Jim Stark, but Luke Skywalker, that was doable. Of the two, 1977 Star Wars is the only one to follow this general shift in character design. This also happens to fall in line with Star Wars' classical fairy tale aesthetic, as the everyman getting pushed along into a great adventure larger than is imaginable is a solidified trope of the hero's journey. Luke is presented to the audience as an average farm boy living a less than fantastical life, desiring nothing more than to escape and get involved with something that will expand his future beyond what he knows. Luke's adventurous spirit, mistakes, and humble upbringing provide the perfect candidate for the optimal entertainment experience associated with American New Wave cinema. When we take a look at the protagonist of Blade Runner, on the other hand, a far different picture is painted. The film takes an incredibly unconventional approach to the 1930s film noir, in the same way that Star Wars takes an unconventional approach to fairy tales. The culture, while our own, is incredibly prominent. Corporations run rampant, atmosphere is dreary and diluted, and manufactured humans live among us. These fantastical elements manage to fit seamlessly into the noir-inspired narrative, as they are second nature to the world that surrounds the characters. Much like Lucas's Star Wars, no one reacts in shock, horror, or excitement at the sight of the things fantastical to our own eyes. They are as much a natural part of the world as our regularities are to us. The combination of these aspects allows the film to operate and drive its narrative in a streamlined and focused manner, not wasting the time to acknowledge what is obvious to the protagonist and supporting characters. Speaking of, the protagonist in Blade Runner is one of the aspects of the film that does not line up with the era of American New Wave cinema. In the vein of the film noir theme it so highly resembles, the primary protagonist is in no way a port or viewing point for the audience to view the story. This can be attributed to Blade Runner's tone and purpose not particularly matching up with the vast majority of films coming out of the era of American New Wave cinema. Films like Jaws, Star Wars, and Grease fall into the category of a now widely used term, blockbuster, coined in 1975. And though Scott's Blade Runner was released at the same time, and in the same culture as the rest of those films, it was by no means a Hollywood blockbuster. Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard seamlessly blends in with a wide variety of classic film noir protagonists from the 1930s. Calm, collected, quiet, and analytical, he is a far cry from Lucas's Skywalker. This inadherence to the commonly used clear slate protagonist motif of blockbuster cinema results go hand in hand with the film's contrast from the intensely engaging and audience-thrilling nature of most American New Wave cinema films. Taking a slower, quieter, and somber, artful approach, it stays true to its noir roots. This is in its own way just as relevant as any Spielberg production is to American New Wave cinema. Thanks to the profound, uniquely odd vision from director Ridley Scott, it takes creative choices that would never be approved by any studio of that time for being too outlandishly contrasting. In conclusion, both Star Wars and Blade Runner portray aspects of American New Wave cinema in terms of characters, location, atmosphere, mise-en-scène, and unique directorial direction, though each achieved that success in enticingly opposing approaches.